Greetings shippers, welcome back. Today we have a classic pairing that, despite having potential laid out for decades, only exploded thanks to an extremely popular proto-CW and eventually full CW show. We're going to be looking at Clex, the pairing of Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, a pairing that could extend far beyond Smallville but owes most of its popularity and the majority of its fandom content to the series and era. There's a lot to explore here as always, so let's get to it. But before we do, we have to thank the lovely people over on Patreon, as this video was the winner of the monthly vote. Thanks so much to all who voted. We get such interesting ships pushed to the foreground that way. This one is an early digital era fandom classic. Also, if you love comics, we started a second channel called Casually Comics where we chat comics all the time. And it's a fun time, so hop on over if you're interested. Now, on to Clex. The characters of Superman and Lex Luthor are quite firmly established in the annals of pop culture. Superman hails from the Golden Age, being created in 1938 in Action Comics #1. In fact, he launches the Golden Age of heroes. Lex doesn't follow far behind, appearing in Action Comics #23 in 1940, and from there their arch-enemy ship would be established, though they would both become far more fleshed out over time, and the details of their history as well as Lex's overall characterization would change. For example, the suave businessman persona would only take root firmly in the 80s with Superman's soft reboot by John Byrne. Before that, he was far more in the mad scientist category. However, since the start, these two's relationship was pivotal to Clark's character. Lex opposed him, but the why would evolve. Now, as mentioned, when most think of Clex, they think of Smallville, a teen drama series about teen Clark growing up in Smallville, which began in 2001 and ended in 2011. The series would start off with Clark and Lex having a strong friendship that even viewers with only a passing comic book knowledge knew was doomed. It added a tragic aura to the proceedings that helped galvanize some shippers. On top of that was just how the two played the roles, particularly Michael Rosenbaum as Lex, who was completely absorbed in Clark, attempting to shower him with gifts, be in his life any way he could, but also still super curious about what was clearly off about Clark, and pushing the boundaries around that extremely. While Clark wanted to be his friend, thought he was cool and worldly and a little dangerous, but couldn't get too close. The series opener would see Clark saving Lex after Lex hit him with his car, and even that frame of Lex reaching out to Clark, a look of pure awe on his face, was enough to start it for some.
Come on, don't die on me.
You would have moments that piled on each other. Lex helping Clark do up his tie, Clark wanting to run off to Metropolis with him when under the influence of red kryptonite, the standing invitation to Luthor Manor at the start. For some, it all started to add up, and this series was also airing just when online fandom was starting to gain traction, and so became one of the hallmark ships of early era fanfiction. However, because of this, not all of it has survived. In 2001, fanfiction.net, the first centralized, specifically fanfiction-based hub, was new, only having been founded in 1998, so most fandom activity still took place on forums or individually maintained fan sites, as this was still very much the mentality of how the internet worked. Not all have been maintained over the years, as maintaining a domain costs money, and as years go by and resources, and in some instances interest wanes, some have fallen by the wayside, and not all the fics were archived or moved. Even later popular blogging sites such as LiveJournal would see many entries purged, as would fanfiction.net during its purging days. So many fics have been lost, but people have saved what they can, and there are still a fair amount on the now big hubs. And there are still some of these classic forums and archives that do exist, so if you are interested in taking a deep dive through history, check those out. But the number does not do justice to how big this pairing was. This was also the era of poor Photoshop manips, as more people having access to more professional programs was also a newer phenomenon. But what these manips lacked in skill, they made up for in enthusiasm. Now this pairing offered many things. AUs where the two remained friends, just alternate tellings where Clark told him his secret, also the angst route once their friendship inevitably dissolved. And over time, as more tropes came to prominence, these two would be added to the lexicon. A very specific popular trope in this fandom was that of alien biology, the idea that Clark would somehow be different than an average human, and this was played with a variety of ways. Another common element one would find was people incorporating comic book elements into their works, creating a kind of fusion of the two worlds, or playing the alternate universe game. Both could yield fun results. However, funnily enough, one of the things the show was often said to have been unique for, the friendship in Smallville between Clark and Lex, is actually inaccurate. Clark and Lex had a history of, well, not quite friendship, but almost almost friendliness and then bitter rivalry, with Lex going full supervillain as a teen in the Silver Age. This being the period from 1956 to 1970, roughly. In these comics, Lex had been in Smallville with Clark. He was a young mad scientist, and Clark, who was Superboy at the time, was partially responsible for him losing his hair, and thus a great rivalry was born. Smallville actually had a lot of these elements. The friendship, growing up in Smallville, the hair loss, the zany Silver Age plots. It loses the optimism of the Silver Age, but it did keep a lot of the rest of the feel. Smallville at its start was part monster of the week, part over-the-top teen drama, and part superhero show, so it was an interesting mix. This series managed to capture an audience primed for transformative fandom in a way that the comics and other works hadn't. Clark and Lex had orbited each other for years, and things had happened in comics and in other adaptations that could be read as very shippable, but hadn't been by most people. Of course, there were exceptions. I personally can point out some highly shippable Superman TAS and Justice League DCAU shenanigans.
He's got something to tell you.
No, I've got something to tell you. Whatever I said to the Martian won't stand up in court. I'll get the best lawyers, the best witnesses, the best...
Lex! None of that matters anymore. Listen.
However, different works attract different audiences, interested in engaging in different ways, and timing matters as well. The internet has allowed fans to connect like never before, which in one of its positives has allowed fan communities to flourish and spread. It has, however, also made toxicity more accessible and visible. As with most things, it's a double-edged sword. Clex would be an integral part of Smallville, so much so that when Lex left, some people left with him. So what was it about these two, aside from the performances and the setup of doomed friendship, that drew some people to them? For many, the two had chemistry. Lex was looking to get Clark out of his shell and show him the world, as it were, and exposed him to concepts he wouldn't have otherwise come into contact with. Clark was a bit of a sobering presence on Lex, but one that made him strive to be better, in the great irony that eventually he would bring out the worst in him. The two had fun together and pulled each other so completely from the lives they were accustomed that it created something new. Their worlds seemed like they couldn't fit together, which made some want them to find a way to make it work all the more. For others, it was the buildup of moments and the subtle hints at Superman canon that made it feel almost like an AU playing out before their eyes, which in a way it was. Now, why did people not ship them? Well, for some, it was the age gap, though in the early 2000s, vehemence about this was much smaller, and also tended to be even smaller in queer pairings. For those who it did bother, they would usually just handle the situation by aging one of the characters up or setting their fic a couple of years in the future. Very easy to do, is when one is creating transformative fiction, they are in control of the world, and can choose to take what they want from canon and leave what they dislike behind. What some people couldn't get past was the amount of hurtful things the two did to each other, the hoops Clark jumped through, the deceptions he created to keep his secret from Lex, and the stalkerish plots and machinations Lex would engage in to try and trip Clark up. And for some, the plots got too zany. There was an early meme about how often Lex learned Clark's secret and then would forget it. Lex in Smallville had chronic amnesia.
Just like you, Clark. See, I've always been honest with you. But it turns out you've been lying to me from the first day I laid eyes on you. No, Lex, I can explain. Too late.
Which led to another Smallville general complaint, one that it was too silly and the viewer couldn't connect, let alone with a ship, or that they would lose the pairing when Smallville shifted focus, which it did a little after the halfway point, becoming more of an assembling the Justice League show. Others just missed the shipping boat, as shipping was still coming to the fore in online culture at this point, and so when some would jump on board years later, particularly in the heyday of 2010 leading up to 2012, which is seen as many as the peak of online shipping, by that point this pairing would have faded, and others had arisen to take its place in terms of prominence. And of course, some just didn't care for one or both of the players involved, or as always had other pairings that they cared for more. For many fans now, Clex and Smallville are a nostalgic memory, but the pairing of Lex and Clark isn't dead, far from it. In fact, Smallville has helped prime the motor for more to see the potential for this pairing in other mediums. Connor Kent being biologically Lex and Clark's son, huge shippable moment. Huge that some would have tossed aside, but thanks to Clex, even if one didn't ship it on Smallville, it opened the floodgates of the potential for some to see it, and this has happened with numerous other moments. It's still a smaller ship in general, but you'll now see more variance in it. Also, there are some great future fics in the Clex Smallville fandom. Angsty stuff. Did you watch Smallville or did you miss it? Are you a Clex shipper or do you have other Clark pairings? As always, please share your thoughts down below, and thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks so much as always for taking some time out of your day to discuss shipping with me. I always appreciate it. And special thanks to all my patrons for voting. Names is always on the side, and there's an other vote ongoing at the time of this recording. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more shipping videos. Let me know if you need those moments, and I will see you again soon. Stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.